Hi, I'm Arthur. The 40k universe has a lot of power scaling issues, to the point where a lot of people tend to openly point out how absolutely overpowered every character and item is. Go on YouTube right now, I mean you're already there, but go on it again. Go in the search bar and type in 40k Space Marine versus, and you'll likely see a bunch of different results of people trying to explain why a Space Marine isn't actually as cool as Boba Fett. No, for real, he could totally hit them with his weird zappy gun and kill them. It's an endless list of that kind of thing. It's a good example of why people obsess over the scale of 40k, because the level of power in this universe at base is a lot more defined and a lot harder to get around than in other pieces of science fiction or in other pieces of media. For like a laser gun in like other universes, it's like, oh, it hits you and it burns you. In 40k, they go into the minutia of why the gun works the way that it does, which lends a little bit more credence to the scale of what it is. For a good example as to what I mean, let's look no further than the Space Marine power armor, made of a thick layer of a ceramic metally thing called ceramite, though it's totally not a metal, even though the suffix is ITE, which usually denotes a mineral of some form or stone. But what do I know? I only went to university for a geology-based course for 4 years. I mean, I dropped out because I failed everything, and I was fucking awful, but I stand by it. So, Space Marine power armor is made of fantastical sci-fi materials, powered by some kind of plasma fusion, probably not nuclear, but maybe nuclear reactor backpack, so they can move faster than people, take almost infinite punishment, and just kill anything? Let's make this worse for scale by introducing Terminator armor. Yeah, that is in fact what it is called, and termination is in fact what they do. Described in the lore as hulking monsters of metal and unmoving hate, they do not stop at whatever they are doing, ever. They are almost impossible to kill, with many different variants that allow for different tasks to be completed. Or you could just throw the mass-produced one at your enemies until they disappear. I mean, that's what the Deathwing does, and they were a problem towards the end of 9th edition. So yeah, Terminator armor has an interesting history. It originally was essentially used as heavy mining equipment, but was repurposed for war. Its purpose? Say you're fighting on a flat plane of land. That plane of land is so uncovered that it's basically a shooting gallery against you towards the people that you're fighting. So what do? You become the fucking cover. Yeah, Terminator plate exchanges mobility for durability to such an extreme degree that in most cases there's an argument to be made about exchanging mobility for durability. Like, oh yeah, I'm lightly armored, but I can cut through the weaker joints of your armor. Cool. Terminator plate is so well protected that, in general, there isn't much a speedy opponent can do to get around it, to the point where it takes thousands of speedy opponents to get past it in some instances. So let's get into the various flavors of the different variants of Terminator plate that you're going to see. Much like with traditional Space Marine power armor, you're going to see that there are very different variants depending on the era that you go into, based upon the need of that era. Firstly, the one you are going to see most if you play 40k is the Indomitus pattern. This little dude here with the face and shit. This is technically the worst pattern of Terminator armor, as it's kind of mass-produced and lacks any special features other than the ease of use, which is a good thing overall. It's incredibly durable, but importantly enough, it is also incredibly modular, with variants dedicated to shooting, melee, heavier melee, and so on. Usually holding heavier weaponry in one hand, like a storm bolter, and a power fist in the other, or a chain fist if you really piss them off. Thunder hammers, combi meltas, the list goes on. It's pretty neat the level of equipment you can just strap onto these fuckers. Next up is two versions of Terminator armor that you kind of see paired up a lot, especially if you're in the Horus Heresy. It's because these are the most commonly used plate during that time. First of these two is a Cataphracti Terminator armor, or sometimes referred to as Cataphracti. I'll be honest with you, this one is my favorite base Terminator armor. I like a few other variants more, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So, Terminator armor is meant to be bulky, and take no damage. Cataphractii armor is meant to be bulkier and also take no damage, but also look like the shots that you are taking are doing nothing to even slow you down. These things make the users so slow that they can barely even move faster than like a brisk walk with all of their might. But in exchange, you get the most durable armor in the entirety of the Space Marines arsenal outside of like hyper mega custom lubricated with the blood of a saint Mark IV. On the flip side, you have the Tartaros pattern Terminator armor, which is really fucking sleek looking and designed to resemble the Mark IV Maximus armor. It's really good. It's meant to fill a similar niche, but on the opposite end, of having slightly more mobility at the cost of a little bit more of the armor. It's faster and less protected than the Indomitus plate, but it is weaker than every other form of Terminator plate. Though, like, not by much, I should also add. It is apparently incredibly difficult to make. It also has my favorite Terminator variant, which is the Caretaker Terminators, equipped with slightly modified Tartaros pattern armor. And by slightly, I mean the armor capabilities are not changed, the movement abilities are not changed, they just bolted a bunch of skin to it. It also has compatibility with new weapons, like these weird Volkite guns. So, those are kind of the three main patterns of Terminator armor that you're going to see across all battlefields. Everything else was either phased out or just doesn't exist anymore. Most other versions you're going to see are just variants of those three. So let's go through some weirder Terminator plates. Some of them have no lore, some of them are faction specific, and one of the ones I'm going to talk about is specific to a single person. Like, just one guy has it, no one else does. So the first one to discuss is the Aegis pattern Terminator armor. The Aegis pattern power armor as well while I'm here. But it's basically the same deal as the power armor. The Terminator plate is Indomitus pattern plate modified to be slightly stronger and bolsters the psychic abilities of the wearer, where Aegis pattern power armor is the same deal, where it's the same as Mark VII Aquila pattern armor. It's meant to bolster the psychic abilities of the individual. With one other major benefit is the wrist-mounted Stormbolter, which is pretty cool. Then you have the early variants of Terminator armor, which is the Mark 1, 2, and 3. There isn't much art of, but there's a bit of a weird discourse with it. Because the Mark 1, 2, and 3 are the prototypes of the initial sets of power armor that you'd see, like the Cataphractii, Tartaros, and Indomitus. They're often confused with another variant of power armor known as the Saturnine armor. We have one image of Saturnine plate, and everybody both loves and hates it in equal measure, and I can see why. Man's built like an egg. Speaking of, Saturnine power armor is often confused for so many other plates. This image here was often thought to be Saturnine armor until someone asked the person who drew it and wrote the book that it was associated with what armor this is, and they said, if I remember correctly, that it was Nocturne pattern power armor because it was a salamander using it and it was custom warplate made for him, which, okay, that complicates things even further, but I digress. Speaking of faction-specific power armor, you have one of the most recognizable versions, which is the Gorgon pattern Terminator armor, which, think of it as a min-maxed version of Indomitus plate. It's only ever worn by the Iron Hands, and to be honest, it's not used that much anymore. Well, sort of. Apparently, the heat this fucker generates, as well as the weird chemicals they use to make its body and weapons work, are lethal to Astartes, like Space Marines. So, in order to wear it, the wearer has to essentially either die or exchange as many body parts as possible to be more machined to interface with it better, which is a very Iron Hands thing to do, I might add. But that's kind of why they stopped using it, because they don't want to relinquish the entirety of their humanity. But some do, so some still wear this pattern of armor. From there, it's mostly just weird variants of the same armor. Like the Gorgon pattern armor is a variant of Indomitus plate, but it's different enough to be its own pattern. Though, I do have one more that I want to point out, and it's the Arcanek pattern Terminator armor. It is mentioned once in the lore. It is a pattern of Terminator armor that is distinct from every other pattern, The Minotaurs have it, and that's it. We don't know what it is. I play Minotaurs, and this infuriates me to no end. Even their chapter master, who is said to be wearing a relic pattern of Terminator armor that isn't produced anymore, it specifically states that he's wearing relic Tartaros pattern Terminator armor, not Arcanak Terminator armor, which is specific to his faction. Which, cool, because looking at this man, if there were entire legions of this specific pattern of armor, I'd run them. They're amazing looking. But no. We don't know what Arcanak pattern Terminator armor is, it's just mentioned once in the Badab War. The last thing that I want to mention that is a little bit harder to explain is about armor modifications. For Space Marines, creating a Space Marine is more of an art than a science. So sometimes things can get a little funky, and Space Marines can sometimes just be significantly bigger than they normally are. With that in mind, sometimes Space Marines that get too big need to have their traditional power armor modified with Terminator armor in order to fit, because Terminator armor is significantly larger, which I think is cool. But what if I told you there was a man, a warrior, so big they couldn't fit him in power armor, so he had to immediately go into Terminator armor. Even still, he was so big, they had to modify his Terminator armor with Dreadnought armor in order for it to fit. That is a man so dangerous. His title is the Red Wake, because wherever he goes is a pile of corpses and red paste that used to be people. This is Tyberos, the leader of the Space Sharks, aka the Carcharodons. His Terminator plate is 100% unique to him, as it is comprised of half relic Terminator armor and half Dreadnought plate, so no other Space Marine is big enough to have something similar. So in general, that is every variant of Terminator armor explained to some degree. There are other faction-specific versions, but they're all just minor modifications of stuff that existed prior. Good example, Iron Warriors. They have a version called the Siege Tyrant, which is just cataphractii plate with slightly more plating and a missile system built into the back. The Fire Drakes, which are Terminators for the Heresy-era Salamanders, and so on and so forth. So there's no real point in mentioning it, because every single pattern of Terminator armor comes from the ones that I just mentioned. But what do you think? What is your favorite variant? I love cataphractii armor, but I love the variants that are with Tartaros armor. Let me know down below. I genuinely want to see this, because Space Marine armors is a very important topic when it comes to the fiction itself, especially when it comes to people making up their own versus battles. Also, make sure to like and subscribe, because I'm going to be producing more content as we go. Join the Discord, link in the description, and become a member of the Arthur Legion today. And before anyone asks, hey, why didn't you discuss the Custodes? It's because Custodian Terminator armor makes no fucking sense. Their armor is already made out of the same shit the Emperor's armor is, so why would you need a fucking heavy armor version of that? Where are you fighting? The fucking surface of the sun?